I discovered my wife had emptied our joint account while I was in the middle of chemotherapy. 10 years of marriage and $137,000 gone with a single bank transfer. I was sitting in an infusion chair when the insufficient funds alert flashed on. My phone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Daniel Reeves, 38, a software developer from Austin, or I used to be, before the diagnosis. Stage 3 colorectal cancer has a way of redefining your identity, reshaping your priorities. But I never imagined it would reveal the foundation of my marriage to be as hollow as my post-chemo stomach. When I first met Alyssa at a tech conference, in 2013, she was vibrant, ambitious, a marketing director with strong opinions and a stronger laugh. We were married 14 months later. We weren't perfect, but we were good. At least I thought we were. Cancer has a way of stress-testing relationships, revealing fault lines you never knew existed. The day of my diagnosis, Alyssa held my hand. So tight, her knuckles went white. "We're going to fight this," she said. "Together." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She drove me to my first 3 appointments, organized my medications, researched clinical trials. She was there. Until suddenly, she wasn't. The changes were subtle at first. She started sleeping in the guest room. "Your night sweats are keeping me up, and I need to be sharp for work." Fair enough. Then she began missing appointments. "The quarterly review is coming up. I can't get away." Understandable. She stopped asking how I was feeling. "It's always the same answer anyway." That one stung. 6 months into my treatment, I was sitting in the infusion center, watching the clear bags of chemicals that were simultaneously saving and destroying. Me dripping into my port. My phone buzzed with a banking alert. "Your account balance has fallen below $500. That was impossible. We had just over $140,000 in that account. My tech company severance package, our emergency fund, money my parents had left me when they died. Everything. I tried logging into our online banking, fingers trembling so badly I mistyped my password twice. When I finally got in, I stared at the screen in disbelief. The balance showed $487.32. There was a single withdrawal transaction from the previous day. $137,500 transferred to an account I didn't recognize. "Mr. Reeves, your blood pressure is spiking. Are you all right?" The nurse was standing over me, concern etched on her face. "I need to call my wife," I managed to say. She didn't pick up. I tried again, straight to voicemail. I sent a text. "Where is our money?" No response. When I got home that afternoon, weakened from the treatment and shaking with a combination of nausea and shock, the house felt different. I called out Alyssa's name. Silence. I walked to our bedroom and opened her closet, half empty. Dresser drawers pulled out, partially emptied. Not a complete move-out, but enough to know this wasn't a day trip. On our bed was an envelope with my name written in her familiar handwriting. Inside was a note, 3 paragraphs long, clinical in its detachment. "Daniel, I can't do this anymore. The past 6 months have shown me that this isn't the life I signed up for. I need to find my own path. I've taken what I believe is my fair share of our assets to start over. You'll have your health insurance through my work until the divorce is finalized. I'm staying at Jen's for now. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. My fair share. As if our marriage had been nothing more than a business arrangement, now being liquidated because one party found the terms inconvenient. As if draining our accounts while I was literally being pumped full of poison was reasonable behavior. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room spinning around me. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when I was fighting for my life. But it was. And in that moment, I realized I was now fighting 2 battles. One against the cancer in my body, and another against the betrayal from the person who had vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. My colleagues used to joke that I was the diplomat of the development team, always finding the middle ground in technical disputes. But something hardens in you when you face mortality. Something crystallizes. When you've spent months watching poison drip into your veins, knowing it's your only chance, you develop a clarity about what matters, what doesn't, and what you're willing to fight for. I didn't scream or break things. I didn't drive to Jen's house for a showdown. Instead, I took a shower, changed into clean clothes, made myself drink a protein shake even though my stomach revolted against it. And then I made a list. Call attorney, check health insurance status, contact bank about fraudulent transfer, document timeline of abandonment, review, marriage, financial history, check credit cards and joint investments, call Dr. Rodriguez about treatment funding options. Contact Cancer Support Group for resources. My hands were steady now. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a strange, cold focus. This was just another problem to solve, another system to debug. And if there's one thing cancer teaches you, it's how to be methodical in the face of chaos. The next morning, after a night of fitful sleep interrupted by chemo side effects, I called my bank. The customer service representative was sympathetic, but not particularly helpful. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves, but Mrs. Reeves is a joint account. Holder. Legally, she has every right to withdraw those funds, even all of them, without notification, while I'm undergoing cancer treatment. I understand your frustration, but from a banking perspective, joint means equal and complete access. There's nothing we can do about the withdrawal itself." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was about to hang up when she added, "However, I am going to transfer you to our fraud department. There are some patterns here that they might want to look at." The fraud analyst who came on the line next, Marcus, had a deeper voice and a more direct approach. "Mr. Reeves, I see the withdrawal in question. Was there anything unusual about your account access in the weeks leading up to this large transfer?" I thought back. "I don't think so. I've been pretty distracted with my treatment." "Let me check something." I could hear typing in the background. "Sir, it appears that the email address associated with your account notifications was changed 3 weeks ago. The password was reset 2 weeks ago, and the phone number for verification codes was changed last week. None of those changes were made from devices previously associated with your account." My stomach dropped. She locked me out deliberately, prepared for this. "It appears that way, and there's more. There were several test transfers, small amounts moving back and forth between your joint account and this new external account, beginning about a month ago. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was calculated, planned while I was vomiting from chemo, while I was fighting to stay alive. My wife had been methodically preparing to leave me at my most vulnerable, testing the financial waters to make sure her escape would go smoothly. "What can we do?" I asked. "I've flagged this as potentially fraudulent activity." While she had legal access to the funds, the pattern of lockout behavior preceding a major withdrawal could constitute financial abuse, especially given your medical situation. We can't reverse the transfer, but we can freeze the receiving account while we investigate. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small victory. Next, I called James Foster, an attorney friend from my college days. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but cancer has a way of clarifying who your real friends are. He answered on the second ring. "Danny? Man, I heard about your diagnosis. I've been meaning to reach out." I gave him the condensed version of what had happened. His reaction shifted from shocked to furious to professional within the span of our conversation. "This is not okay," he said finally. "Not legally, not morally. Texas may be a community property state, but judges take a very dim view of this kind of financial abandonment, especially during a health crisis. Forward me every document you have. Bank statements, medical bills, the note she left, everything. I'm coming over tonight." True to his word, James showed up at my door at 7 p.m. with Chinese food I couldn't eat and a determination I desperately needed. He spread papers across my dining room table, taking notes, building a case while I sipped ginger tea and tried to keep my hands from shaking. "She's making a critical mistake if she thinks the courts will view this as her fair share," James said, making air quotes. "Especially since it appears a significant portion of these funds came from your inheritance and severance package. Even in community property states, those can often be considered separate property." While James worked, I received a text from an unknown number. "You should stop now. You're only making things harder. I'm entitled to start fresh." "Alyssa, from a new phone." I showed it to James, who took a photo of the message. "More evidence of abandonment and lack of good faith. Keep everything." That night, after James left with promises to file emergency motions in the morning, I sat on my back porch looking at the stars. We'd bought this house because Alyssa loved the view. "Just imagine," she'd said, "sitting out here when we're old and grey, counting stars like we're counting blessings." Now I was counting stars alone, with a port in my chest and uncertainty in my future. The cricket sounds that had once been background noise now seemed deafening in the absence of another human presence. The neighbour's cat, a friendly orange, Tabby named Marmalade, jumped onto the railing and regarded me with curious eyes. "It's just you and me tonight, buddy," I told him. He meowed in what I chose to interpret as solidarity, and settled into my lap, purring against my too thin frame. I stroked his fur and made myself a promise. I would not let this break me. Cancer couldn't have me, and neither could betrayal. Whatever strength I had left would go toward fighting both battles with everything I had. The next few days passed, in a blur of legal filings, medical appointments, and unanswered texts to Alyssa. My oncologist, Dr. Rodriguez, was furious when I explained the situation. "This is unacceptable," she said, checking my blood work results with more force than necessary. "Financial toxicity is a real and dangerous side effect of cancer treatment. The stress alone could impact your recovery." "I'll be okay," I assured her, though I wasn't sure how. "We'll make sure of it," she replied, her jaw set. "I'm connecting you with our financial counselor this afternoon. There are programs, grants, and I'm documenting everything about your care and how this situation could impact your treatment outcomes. Your lawyer may need it." 3 days after the discovery, I received a call from Marcus at the bank. "Mr. Reeves, we've completed our initial investigation. While we can't reverse the transfer as Mrs. Reeves was legally allowed to make it, we have frozen the receiving account based on the suspicious changes made to your contact information prior to the withdrawal." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, trying not to get my hopes up. "It means the money isn't gone. It's in limbo. Your wife can't access it currently, and neither can you. But with a court order..." He left the implication hanging. It wasn't a victory, but it was a stalemate. And in my current situation, I'd take it. James filed for an emergency hearing, citing abandonment during medical crisis and financial abuse. He subpoenaed Alyssa's email and phone records, looking for evidence of premeditation. The date was set for 2 weeks out, an eternity when you're measuring life in chemo cycles, but lightning fast in legal terms. Meanwhile, I focused on what I could control. I opened a new bank account at a different institution. I changed all my passwords. I accepted help from friends who organized a meal train and driving schedule to get me to appointments. My sister flew in from Chicago to stay with me for a few weeks, bringing her organizational skills and fierce protectiveness. Through it all, I continued treatment, bag after bag of chemicals dripping into my veins, nausea that came in waves, fatigue that felt like gravity had doubled overnight. But strangely, I found myself more determined than before. The betrayal had awakened something. In me, not bitterness exactly, but resolve. Every time a nurse commented on my positive attitude, I thought about proving Alyssa wrong. About surviving not just cancer, but this too. 10 days after the money disappeared, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Is this Daniel Reeves?" A woman's voice, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Sandra Wilkins. I'm a compliance officer with First Meridian Bank." "Not my bank. I'm calling regarding some unusual activity we've detected." My heart rate picked up. "What kind of activity?" "Are you familiar with an Alyssa Reeves? She's my wife. We're separated." A pause. "Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Reeves attempted to open an account with us using funds transferred from your joint account at Texas Trust. Our systems flagged the transaction due to some irregularities. When we investigated further, we found that the Texas Trust account had been flagged for potential financial abuse during medical hardship. Is that accurate?" "Yes," I said, sitting down heavily on the couch. "I'm undergoing cancer treatment. She emptied our accounts without notice." "I see." Her voice softened slightly. "Mr. Reeves, I want you to know that financial institutions take these matters very seriously. We've placed a hold on these funds pending further investigation. We're also legally required to report suspected financial exploitation of vulnerable individuals." "I'm not." I started to protest that I wasn't vulnerable, but stopped myself. In the eyes of the law, a cancer patient abandoned by their spouse probably fit the definition. "What happens now?" I asked instead. "We'll be conducting a formal investigation. Your wife was quite upset when informed of the hold earlier today. She's threatened legal action against our institution, but our compliance department is standing firm. We'll likely need statements from you and your medical providers." After getting Sandra's direct contact information, I called James immediately. "This is huge," he said when I finished explaining. "First Meridian has essentially validated our claims before we even got to court. Their investigation will carry significant weight with a judge. And the fact that she tried to open a new account with the funds shows intent to permanently deprive you of assets during a health crisis." 2 days later, I received another call, this time from Jen, Alyssa's friend. "Daniel," she sounded, uncomfortable. "I thought you should know that Alyssa moved out yesterday." "Moved out? From your place? Where did she go?" "She didn't say exactly, just that she was getting out of Texas." She was. Not in a good place. The bank situation really blindsided her. Something in her tone made me pause. "Jen, did you know about her plans to take the money and leave?" A long silence. Then, "Not all of it. She told me your marriage was over, that you'd grown apart even before the diagnosis. She said she needed space to figure things out. I didn't know about the money until after, I swear." "Do you believe that's true? That we were over before the cancer?" Another pause. "No," she finally said. "That's why I'm calling. This isn't the Alyssa I know. The past few months she's been different, distant, spending time with new friends from work, especially this guy, Ryan. He's in finance or something. Ever since she started hanging out with him, she's been changing." Ryan? The name was vaguely familiar. Alyssa had mentioned a new financial advisor at her company a few months back. "Just a colleague," she'd said when I asked who she was. "Texting so late at night." "Thanks for telling me, Jen." "I'm sorry, Daniel. About everything. And I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I should have realized." After hanging up, I sat in silence, processing this new information. There was more to this story than Alyssa simply abandoning a sick husband. There were others involved influencing her decisions. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it added context, and possibly a new avenue to explore. I called James and asked him to look into Ryan from Alyssa's workplace. If there was a relationship there, if he had been advising her financially, it could strengthen our case. Even better, if he had professional certifications that he'd violated by advising her. To commit financial abuse, we might have leverage beyond just Alyssa. The next day, I had my regular chemo session. As I sat in the infusion chair, watching the clear liquid drip into my veins, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. The initial shock and betrayal had crystallized into something else, a quiet determination that was actually helping me face the cancer with renewed resolve. "You seem different today," observed Maria, my regular nurse. "More centered." "Fighting on 2 fronts will do that to you," I replied with a half smile. "2 fronts, cancer and divorce." She nodded knowingly. "Unfortunately, we see that more often than you'd think, but usually not quite so. Dramatically." "Lucky me, always an overachiever," I quipped. As Maria checked my vitals, my phone buzzed with a text from James. "We need to talk. Found something interesting about Ryan. Call me after your treatment." The universe wasn't done with revelations yet. When I called James that evening, his voice had that particular tone lawyers get when they found something significant. "Ryan Donahue," he said without preamble. "Senior financial advisor at Alyssa's company, previously worked at 3 other firms in the past 5 years. Want to know why he moves around so much? Tell me." He's been the subject of 2 different client complaints for questionable investment advice. Nothing that rose to criminal charges, but enough that he keeps needing fresh starts at new firms. And here's where it gets interesting. I have a contact at the State Securities Board who owed me a favor. Ryan's been on their radar for potentially engaging in a pattern of advising vulnerable individuals to liquidate legitimate investments for alternative investment opportunities that he personally manages. You think he's been manipulating Alyssa, getting her to take our money for some investment scheme? It's looking that way. My contact is very interested in your situation. This could be the pattern they need to build a case against him. For the first time since seeing that bank alert, I felt a glimmer of something like vindication. Alyssa had betrayed me, yes, but she might also have been manipulated by someone taking advantage of our vulnerable situation. The next morning, I received another call from Sandra at First Meridian Bank. "Mr. Reeves, I wanted to update you personally. Mrs. Reeves came into our branch yesterday afternoon, quite agitated. She was accompanied by a man who identified himself as her financial advisor. They demanded the release of the funds and threatened regulatory complaints when we refused." "Let me guess, Ryan Donahue?" A surprised pause. "Yes, that's correct. How did you know?" "We're building a picture of what's really happening here." "What did you tell them?" "I informed them that our compliance department had identified multiple red flags and that we were cooperating with an investigation into potential financial exploitation. Mr. Donahue became unprofessional. Security had to escort them out." I couldn't help the small smile that formed. "And the funds?" "Remain frozen pending investigation and court orders. But Mr. Reeves, there's something else you should know. During their visit, Mrs. Reeves made several statements that our branch manager documented. She claimed the money was for an urgent investment opportunity that couldn't wait for your recovery. She also stated that you were too sick to make sound financial decisions and that she was protecting your joint assets." Each word felt like another piece of evidence falling into place. "Thank you for telling me this. There's one more thing. After they left, our manager did some checking. Mr. Donahue is not registered with our institution as a financial advisor, nor does he appear in good standing with regulatory bodies. We've reported this to the appropriate authorities. The dam was breaking. What had started as a personal betrayal was evolving into something that looked increasingly like a financial predator, taking advantage of a vulnerable woman with access to a sick husband's assets. I immediately called James and relayed the conversation. "This changes our approach," he said. "We may be dealing with financial fraud beyond just the divorce issues. I'm calling the DA's office. They need to be looped in before Alyssa does something even more damaging to herself and to you." That evening, as I was heating up soup that my neighbor had dropped off, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found two people standing there. A woman in a blazer who introduced herself as Detective Lisa Moore from the Financial Crimes Unit, and beside her, looking smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever seen her, was Alyssa. My first instinct was to shut the door, but Detective Moore spoke quickly. "Mr. Reeves, your wife has some information regarding Ryan Donahue that may be crucial to an ongoing investigation. She's also prepared to return the funds that were withdrawn from your joint account. May we come in?" I looked at Alyssa, really looked at her for the first time in months. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture defeated. Whatever had transpired in the past 24 hours had broken through the cold determination I'd witnessed in her final weeks at home. I stepped aside to let them in. What followed was one of the most surreal conversations of my life. Detective Moore explained that Alyssa had come to the police station that afternoon, visibly distraught. She had realized that Ryan's guaranteed investment opportunity was likely fraudulent, after he became increasingly aggressive about transferring the money again, this time to an offshore account for better tax advantages. When First Meridian had frozen the funds and reported the suspicious activity, Ryan had pressured Alyssa to try other banks. When that failed, he'd suggested she liquidate any remaining assets, including her retirement accounts and even selling her car, to keep the investment opportunity open. That was when doubt had finally overcome her trust in him. "I made a terrible mistake," Alyssa said quietly, looking at the floor rather than at me. "I let him convince me that taking control of our finances was the smart thing to do while you were sick, that I was protecting us both. It started small, moving some money to safer investments. Then bigger moves. He made it all sound so reasonable. And leaving me? Was that his idea too?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. She flinched. "No, that was..." "I was struggling, Daniel, with everything. Your diagnosis, the uncertainty. Ryan said I needed to protect myself, that statistically, medical bankruptcies destroy families. He had all these stories about clients whose lives were ruined by a spouse's illness. He made it seem like leaving was the rational choice, not the cruel one." Detective Moore interjected gently. "Mr. Reeves, we believe Mrs. Reeves is one of potentially dozens of victims. Ryan Donahue appears to target individuals in vulnerable, emotional states, often partners of people facing serious medical issues or recent widows. He builds trust, isolates them from support systems, then manipulates them into making financially devastating decisions." I looked at Alyssa, this woman I had loved for a decade, now sitting broken on the edge of my couch, the same couch where we'd watched movies, made plans, built a life together. The anger was still there, but alongside it now was something else, a complicated mixture of pity and vindication. "What happens now?" I asked Detective Moore. "Mrs. Reeves has provided a full statement and evidence of Mr. Donahue's activities. Based on this and other victims coming forward, we've obtained warrants for his financial records and devices. He's facing potential charges of fraud, financial exploitation, and practicing without proper licensing. As for the funds..." She glanced at Alyssa. I've signed paperwork authorizing the release of all the money back to Daniel, Alyssa said quietly. I know it doesn't fix anything, but it's a start. After Detective Moore left, Alyssa and I sat in awkward silence. The woman I'd built a life with now felt like a stranger in our home, a stranger who had nearly destroyed me at my most vulnerable, but who had also been manipulated and victimized herself. I should go, she finally said. Where are you staying? A hotel for now. I can't face Jen or any of our friends after what I've done. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted for anything else. As she reached the door, she turned back. I know, you won't believe this, but before Ryan, before the cancer even, I did love you, Daniel. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to remember that when it mattered most. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet house, processing everything. The money would be returned. Alyssa's betrayal had been influenced by a predator who recognized and exploited vulnerability. But the trust was still broken. The marriage was still over. Some damages can't be undone, only moved past. The next morning I called James and filled him in on everything. So what do you want to do? He asked after listening to the full story. We could still pursue the divorce on terms, highly favorable to you, given the circumstances. Or we could pause and see how the criminal investigation plays out. I thought about it for a long moment. Let's proceed with the divorce, but fairly. She was manipulated too. I don't want revenge. I just want to move forward. You're a better man than most would be in your position, James observed. Cancer gives you perspective, I replied. Life's too short to carry unnecessary weight. 3 days after my conversation with Alyssa, I sat in Dr. Rodriguez's office for my post-chemo evaluation. She studied my latest blood work with practiced eyes, her expression neutral until she glanced up at me. Your markers are improving, she said with a small smile. Not dramatically, but heading in the right direction. How are you feeling? Physically or emotionally? I asked. Both. I considered the question carefully. The nausea was still there, but less debilitating. The fatigue remained a constant companion. But the crushing weight of betrayal had shifted somehow, transformed into something more complex, but less immediately suffocating. I'm processing, I finally said. Everything's a lot to handle at once, Dr. Rodriguez nodded. I've seen how stress and emotional well-being can impact treatment outcomes. Given everything that's happened with your wife and finances, I'm actually impressed with your numbers. Maybe anger is good fuel for fighting cancer, I suggested, with a weak smile. Or maybe you're stronger than even you realized. She closed my file. The money situation, is that resolved? Getting there. The bank is releasing the funds back to me. The paperwork should be finalized this week. Good. One less thing to worry about. She hesitated, then added, Daniel, I know this isn't my area, but as your doctor, I'd recommend considering therapy. Fighting cancer is hard enough without adding trauma from betrayal. We have excellent counselors who specialize in supporting patients through both health and life crises. I'd been avoiding the idea, telling myself I needed to focus on physical survival first. But perhaps the two weren't so separate after all. I'll think about it, I promised. The next day I received an email from First Meridian Bank. The investigation had concluded, and they were preparing to transfer the full amount. Back to my new account, Sandra Wilkins, the compliance officer, had attached a personal note. Mr. Reeves, while these circumstances are unfortunate, I wanted to let you know that your case has prompted our institution to develop enhanced protections for customers undergoing medical crises. Sometimes it takes one person's experience to create change that helps many. I wish you strength in your recovery. I stared at those words for a long time. The idea that my painful experience might help prevent others from facing similar situations was oddly comforting, a silver lining I hadn't anticipated. James called later that afternoon with an update on the legal front. The divorce papers are being drawn up, he said. Given Alyssa's cooperation with authorities and the return of funds, we're proceeding with a no-fault divorce with equitable but not punitive division of remaining assets. Does that still align with your wishes? Yes, I confirmed. I don't want to destroy her. I just want this chapter closed so I can focus on healing. There's something else, James added. The DA's office is building a strong case against Ryan Donahue. They've identified 7 other victims with similar stories, partners of people with serious medical conditions who were convinced to take drastic financial actions. They'll need Alyssa's testimony and possibly yours as well. The thought of facing a courtroom while still undergoing treatment was daunting, but if it meant preventing others from falling prey to the same scheme, it would be worth it. Whatever they need, I said, this guy needs to be stopped. After hanging up, I sat at my desk and opened a document I'd been avoiding, a spreadsheet tracking my medical expenses. With the return of our savings, I could breathe easier about covering treatments, but the long-term financial picture remained uncertain. My short-term disability would end soon, and while I had options for extended leave, the reduction in income was significant. Before cancer, I'd been developing a project on the side, a software application to help small businesses manage workflow more efficiently. I'd shelved it when the diagnosis came, lacking both energy and focus. But now, looking at the partially completed code, I wondered if it might provide not just financial support, but also a sense of purpose during recovery. My sister Kate, who had extended her stay to help me through the worst of the chemo cycles, found me still at the computer hours later. "What are you working on?" she asked, setting a cup of ginger tea beside me. "You look more engaged than I've seen you in weeks." I explained the project, my words coming faster as enthusiasm built. It's not just about the money, it's about creating something while so much else feels like it's being destroyed. Kate studied me with the particular mix of concern and pride that older sisters perfect. "Just don't overdo it. Your body is still fighting a major battle." "I know my limits," I assured her. "Actually, this is the first time since diagnosis that I've felt like myself again. Not just a cancer patient, not just a betrayed husband, but Daniel the creator." The next morning, the funds from First Meridian appeared in my account, $137,500 back where it belonged. The relief was profound, but tinged with lingering hurt. This wasn't just money. It represented security during illness, years of work, inheritance from loved ones now gone. That Alyssa had taken it, regardless of influence, revealed a fundamental breach that couldn't be undone. I transferred a portion to a completely separate account at a different bank, a precaution that felt necessary now. Trust once broken doesn't mend easily. Later that day, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Daniel, it's Jen. I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone connected to Alyssa right now, but I'd like to drop something off. No need to see me if you don't want to." Curious. Despite myself, I agreed. An hour later, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, no one was there but a cardboard box sat on the porch. Inside was a stack of notebooks, my journals from the past 5 years, which had gone missing during Alyssa's departure. A note lay on top. "Found these at Alyssa's hotel. Thought you'd want them back. For what it's worth, I don't think she read them. They were still in the sealed bag from when you moved them to make room for medical supplies." Jen. I ran my hands over the familiar covers. These journals contained my private thoughts, project ideas, reflections on life and marriage, including the early days of suspecting something was wrong with Alyssa. Their return felt significant, a small restoration of privacy that had been violated in so many other ways. That evening, I attended my first cancer support group meeting. I'd been avoiding it, telling myself I didn't need to sit in a circle sharing feelings with strangers. But with Kate planning to return to Chicago soon, I recognized the need for a community that understood the unique challenges of cancer in a way even the most well-meaning friends and family couldn't. The group met in a community room at the hospital, 10 people of varying ages, all in different stages of treatment. The facilitator, a social worker named Michael, who was himself a cancer survivor, created a space that felt safe without being saccharine. I listened more than I talked that first night, but when I did mention the situation with Alyssa, I was surprised by the nodding heads. "My business partner tried to force me out during my treatment," said a woman named Rachel. "Claimed I wasn't pulling my weight anymore. My brother emptied our mother's accounts while she was in hospice," added an older man named George. "Said he was getting his share before medical bills took everything. My husband of 30 years left 2 months after my mastectomy," shared Elaine quietly. "Said he didn't sign up for this." The stories poured out, tales of betrayal and abandonment during illness, but also of unexpected support, of relationships strengthened rather than broken by crisis, of resilience discovered only when everything else was stripped away. "Cancer is the ultimate filter," Michael observed. "It shows you who people really are, sometimes including yourself." I left that meeting feeling less alone. My situation with Alyssa wasn't as unique as I'd thought. Crisis reveals character, hers, and also mine. How I responded to this. Betrayal would say as much about me as her actions said about her. The next morning, I had a follow-up with my radiologist, Dr. Park. The news was cautiously optimistic. The tumor was showing signs of shrinking. Not a miracle, but progress. "You're responding well to the treatment protocol," she said. "If this trajectory continues, we might be able to schedule surgery sooner than initially projected." Hope, a dangerous emotion during cancer, yet essential for survival. I allowed myself to feel it carefully, like testing weight on an injured limb. As I was leaving the hospital, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Daniel Reeves?" A male voice I didn't recognize. "Speaking. Who is this?" "Detective Mark Santos, Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you've been in contact with my colleague, Detective Moore, regarding Ryan Donahue." My grip tightened on the phone. "Yes. Has something happened?" "We've expanded our investigation based on new evidence. Several victims have come forward, including individuals from 2 other states. Donahue appears to have been operating this scheme for at least 3 years, targeting families dealing with medical crises. We've frozen several accounts and obtained warrants for his residence and office." "Have you found him?" I asked. "That's actually why I'm calling. We haven't been able to locate Donahue for the past 48 hours. His apartment was cleared out, and he hasn't shown up for work. We have reason to believe he's attempting to flee jurisdiction." "And you think he might contact Alyssa?" I concluded. "It's possible. Has your wife mentioned any recent communication from him?" "Ex-wife, soon enough. No, but we're not exactly in regular contact." I hesitated, then added, "Detective, if he's desperate and thinks Alyssa might have access to funds or information that could incriminate him further, we've assigned officers to monitor her hotel and have advised her to take precautions. I'm calling all potential contacts to issue the same warning. If Donahue reaches out to you in any way, please contact us immediately." After hanging up, I sat in my car processing this new development. Despite everything, I found myself worried about Alyssa's safety. Anger and betrayal hadn't completely erased a decade of caring for someone. I debated whether to reach out to her directly, but decided against it. The police were already monitoring the situation, and inserting myself might complicate things. Instead, I texted Jen. "Just heard Donahue is missing. Police are concerned. If you're in touch with Alyssa, make sure she's being careful." Jen's response came quickly. "Already on it. She's staying with me now. Hotel felt too exposed after police warning." That evening, as I was reviewing code for my project, trying to maintain some normalcy despite the ongoing drama. My doorbell rang. Wary after the day's revelations, I checked the security camera I'd installed after Alyssa left. Detective Moore stood on my porch. When I opened the door, I could tell immediately that something had happened. Her professional demeanor was intact, but there was an urgency to her posture. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize for the late visit. May I come in?" I led her to the living room, anxiety mounting with each step. "We've located Ryan Donahue," she said, without preamble. "He attempted to board a flight to Belize using falsified documents. Airport security detained him, and he's now in custody." Relief flooded through me. "That's good news, right?" "Yes, but there's more." She hesitated. "When we searched his laptop, we found detailed files on all his victims, including you and your wife. He had extensive notes on your cancer diagnosis, treatment schedule, prognosis, financial status, information that goes beyond what a casual acquaintance would know." A chill ran through me. Alyssa told him all this. "We believe so, yes, but there's something else." Detective Moore pulled out her tablet and opened a document. "We found this draft email in his deleted items folder. It was never sent, but it appears to be notes for a conversation with your wife." She handed me the tablet. The email was dated 2 months into my treatment, weeks before Alyssa began pulling away. "Alyssa, points to emphasize in next meeting. Statistics on financial devastation following cancer. Attach Forbes article. Remind her of brother's friend, who lost everything caring for sick wife. Emphasize terminal nature of husband's condition. Doctors always give optimistic timelines. Suggest gradual asset protection plan, starting with smaller accounts, position as protecting her future, not abandoning husband. If emotional resistance, focus on practical reality versus guilt. Remind her that financial security honors his memory. After he's gone." I read it twice, words blurring as their implications sank in. "He was planning this from the beginning, manipulating her to believe I was going to die." "It appears so," Detective Moore confirmed gently. "And your diagnosis wasn't terminal, correct?" "Stage 3 colorectal, serious, absolutely. But my doctors have been cautiously optimistic about my prognosis with aggressive treatment." I set down the tablet, disgust rising in my throat. He convinced her I was dying to justify taking the money. "We've seen this pattern in his other cases. He researches medical conditions, then exaggerates the worst-case scenarios to create urgency. In some instances, he even arranged for chance meetings with families he'd identified as potential targets. Our meeting wasn't by chance." Detective Moore hesitated. "We're still investigating, but we've found evidence that he researched employees at several companies with good benefits and retirement plans. Your wife's company was on his list. The timing of his employment there, shortly before your diagnosis, raises questions." My mind reeled. This wasn't just opportunistic predation, it was calculated targeting. Ryan had positioned himself near Alyssa before we even knew I was sick, waiting for vulnerability he could exploit. "There's one more thing you should know," Detective Moore added. "Your wife came to the station this morning. When she learned about the extent of his deception, particularly regarding your prognosis, she was extremely distressed. She's provided additional evidence and is fully cooperating with prosecution." After Detective Moore left, I sat in the silence of my house trying to process everything. The betrayal remained real. Alyssa had still made choices that caused immense pain, but the context had shifted again. She'd been manipulated by someone who had studied how to exploit fear and vulnerability with surgical precision. I poured myself a small glass of the whiskey I'd been avoiding during treatment, just enough for a toast. "To complexity," I said, "to the empty room. Nothing is ever as simple as we first believe. The next day I received a letter delivered by courier, Alyssa's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a single page. Daniel, I've learned that the detective spoke with you about Ryan's files. There's no excuse for what I did. Manipulation doesn't absolve responsibility, but I need you to know, I never believed you would die until Ryan convinced me it was inevitable. He showed me research and statistics that painted a hopeless picture, connected me with former clients who regretted not protecting assets before losing their partners. It doesn't matter now. The damage is done. But before we close this chapter completely, I wanted you to have this closure. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you or because I couldn't handle the illness. I left because I was convinced by a skilled predator that it was the rational choice in the face of what he assured me was your terminal condition. I will carry the shame of my weakness and betrayal forever. You deserved better. Fight this. Cancer with everything you have, Daniel. Prove him wrong. Prove that hope wasn't foolish. I've instructed James to proceed with the divorce as efficiently as possible so you can move forward. The DA has everything they need from me for the case against Ryan. You won't have to see me again. Wishing you health and healing, Alyssa. Folded the letter carefully and placed it in my bedside drawer, not to cherish but to acknowledge, a piece of the puzzle that helped make sense of senselessness. That weekend, Kate returned to Chicago. Her 6-week stay had been a lifeline, but she had her own family and career waiting. The night before she left, we sat on the back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the early summer evening. "I'm proud of you," she said suddenly, "not just for fighting the cancer, but for how you've handled everything with Alyssa. You've shown remarkable grace." "Not always," I admitted. "There've been plenty of moments of rage and bitterness." "Of course there have. You're human. But you didn't let it consume you. You didn't use it as an excuse to become cruel or vengeful. That matters." I considered her words. "I think cancer changes your perception of justice. When you're fighting for your life, watching poison drip into your veins for hours, the concept of making someone pay for hurting you feels smaller somehow." "Will you be okay when I leave?" Kate asked, concern evident in her voice. "I will," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. "This isn't the life I planned, but it's the one I have. And I'm starting to see ways forward that I couldn't before." After Kate's departure, the house felt emptier, but not in the hollow way it had when Alyssa first left. This was a quietness with possibility rather than absence at its core. I established new routines, mornings working on my software project, afternoons resting or attending medical appointments, support group meetings twice a week, dinner with friends who had rallied around me with a steadfastness that still humbled me. Small steps forward, building a life that accommodated illness, without being defined by it. 2 weeks later, I received another call from James. "The divorce paperwork is ready for your review," he said. "And there's something else. The DA is offering Donahue a plea deal. If he accepts, there won't be a trial." "What are the terms?" 15 years, possibility of parole after 8, full restitution to victims, permanent ban from financial industry. It's a good deal from the prosecution standpoint. Complex. Financial fraud cases can be difficult for juries, and if he doesn't take it, they'll pursue maximum charges across multiple jurisdictions. Could be looking at 25 to 30 years total. I thought about it. The prospect of avoiding testimony was appealing, allowing me to focus on recovery without the added stress of a trial. Yet part of me wanted the public reckoning, wanted Donahue to face his victims directly. "What's Alyssa saying about it?" I asked. "She's deferring to the other victims, says she'll support whatever they decide." Most seem inclined to accept. The plea, certainty of punishment versus the risk and stress of trial. In the end, I agreed with the majority. Justice didn't require my personal involvement in its delivery, only the assurance that it would be served. The next day, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed what Dr. Park had suggested might be possible. My tumor had responded well enough to treatment that we could schedule surgery sooner than originally planned. A major milestone in the cancer journey, bringing both hope and new anxiety. "We'll need to adjust your treatment schedule leading up to the procedure," she explained. "And recovery will require significant support. Do you have someone who can stay with you? Family, friends?" "I'll figure something out," I assured her, already mentally reviewing options. The support network that had emerged during this crisis continued to surprise me with its strength and willingness. That evening, as I was updating my treatment calendar, I received an unexpected text from Jen. "Wanted you to hear this from a friendly source before it hits the grapevine. Alyssa is moving to Michigan next month. Her sister offered her a fresh start there. Thought you'd want to know." Michigan. Hundreds of miles away, a clean break, a new chapter for both of us. I was surprised by the complex emotions the news evoked, relief predominantly, but tinged with a kind of final sadness, the end of something that had once held such promise. I texted back, "Thanks for letting me know, wishing her well." It was true, I realized. Despite everything, I did wish her healing and a better path forward. My anger had transformed into something more nuanced, a recognition that human weakness and manipulation had collided in a perfect storm that had hurt us both, though certainly me more directly. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught myself checking the dresser drawer where Alyssa used to keep her jewelry, a habitual glance that had persisted despite her absence. For the first time, I didn't feel the sharp pang of loss. Instead, I felt something new, possibility, space for whatever came next. I opened my journal and wrote, "Today, I am planning for a future, not the one I expected, but one with its own potential for meaning. The cancer fight continues. The betrayal is healing over. The road ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in months, I'm curious rather than afraid to see where it leads." The morning of my surgery, I woke before dawn, watching grey light slowly illuminate my bedroom ceiling. There's something uniquely clarifying about knowing that in a few hours you'll be unconscious, while surgeons remove a piece of your body that's trying to kill you. Priorities crystallize, fears both diminish and magnify simultaneously. My friend, Marcus would be arriving soon to drive me to the hospital. He'd volunteered immediately when I mentioned the surgery date at our weekly poker game, a tradition we'd maintained even during my treatment, though the other guys had graciously moved it to my house on weeks when I couldn't travel. "You won't be alone for this," Marcus had said simply. "No dramatic declarations, just steady friendship when it mattered most." While waiting, I checked my phone one last time. Messages of support had poured in overnight. Kate. "Call me the second. You're awake. Love you, bro. Dr. Rodriguez. See you soon. We've got this. Rachel from support group. Visualize healing. We're all holding space for you today. My former team at work. Dev squad sending good code your way. No bugs allowed." And unexpectedly, a brief text from an unknown number. "Wishing you strength today, Alyssa." Even now, preparing to leave for Michigan, she'd remembered my surgery date. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete the message either. Marcus arrived precisely at 5:30 a.m., characteristically punctual. "Surgery day," he said with forced cheerfulness when I opened the door. "Ready for your grand internal renovation." His attempt at lightness was exactly what I needed. "As ready as you can be for someone to redecorate your insides," I replied, matching his tone. The drive to the hospital was mostly silent. "What do you talk about on the way to cancer surgery?" The weather seemed trivial, sports irrelevant. So, we just existed together in the quiet morning, the radio playing softly in the background. "Thanks for doing this," I finally said as we pulled into the hospital parking lot. Marcus looked at me strangely. "You don't need to thank me. If our situations were reversed, you'd be here. That simple certainty, the knowledge that some connections remain unbreakable even when others have failed, carried me through the hospital doors with steadier steps than I might have managed alone. The pre-surgery process was a blur of paperwork, vital checks, and increasingly serious-looking medical personnel. Dr. Harris, my surgical oncologist, stopped by for a final consultation, his confidence reassuring. "We've got an excellent team today," he said, reviewing my scans one last time. "The chemotherapy has done its job shrinking the tumor, so I'm optimistic about achieving clean margins." Clean margins, the goal of cancer surgery. Remove the tumor with enough healthy tissue surrounding it to ensure no cancer cells remain. A physical manifestation of what I'd been trying to achieve emotionally as well, cutting out the disease while preserving what was healthy and worth saving. "Any last questions?" Dr. Harris asked. I had dozens, of course. What if they find more cancer than expected? What if something goes wrong? What if I don't wake up? But those weren't questions he could truly answer, so I simply shook my head. "Then I'll see you on the other side," he said with a gentle squeeze of my shoulder. As the anesthesiologist explained what would happen next, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened now was beyond my control. I had done everything I could, followed treatment protocols, stayed as positive as possible, surrounded myself with support. The rest was in others' hands. "We're ready to begin," the anesthesiologist said, injecting something into my IV. "Can you count backward from 10 for me?" 10, 9, 8. The ceiling tiles began to blur. 7, 6. My eyelids grew impossibly heavy. 5. Darkness. Then disorientation. Voices. Beeping. Pain. Distant at first, then insistent. "Mr. Reeves, can you hear me? The surgery's over. You're in recovery." I forced my eyes open, squinting against harsh fluorescent lights. A nurse I didn't recognize was checking monitors beside my bed. "Did they get it all?" My voice was a rasp, my throat raw from the breathing tube. "Dr. Harris will be in shortly to discuss the results," she replied with practiced diplomacy. "How's your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? The pain was probably a 7, but I said 4, not wanting to seem weak or complaining. She gave me a knowing look. "Hospital veteran, huh? Downplaying to avoid the strong meds?" I managed a weak smile. "Busted. I'll bring you something that will take the edge off without making you too foggy. Dr. Harris likes his patients alert for post-op discussions." True to her word, the medication she administered dulled the pain to a manageable throb without clouding my thinking. By the time Dr. Harris arrived an hour later, I was propped up slightly, able to focus. "The surgery went well," he began, his expression cautiously positive. "We removed the primary tumor along with 14 lymph nodes for testing. Visually, we achieved clean margins, but we'll have pathology confirmation in a few days. And the lymph nodes, some appeared enlarged, which is why we took more than initially planned. But again, we'll need pathology for definitive answers." I nodded, understanding the mixed message. Successful surgery, but the cancer journey wasn't necessarily over. More waiting, more uncertainty. "Recovery will be your primary job for the next few weeks," Dr. Harris continued. "No lifting, limited movement, careful wound care. Do you have adequate support at home?" "Yes," I said, thinking of the rotation of friends who had already volunteered for post-hospital shifts. "I've got people." The days that followed were a haze of pain management, shuffling walks down hospital corridors, and visits from friends who tried not to look concerned at my diminished state. Marcus brought my laptop so I could work on my software project during lucid moments. Kate called daily, frustrated at being too far away to help. The support group sent a handmade card signed by everyone. 4 days after surgery, Dr. Harris returned with my pathology report. "Good news," he said, his professional demeanor relaxing slightly. "Clean margins confirmed. Of the 14 lymph nodes we removed, only 2 showed cancer cells, both adjacent to the primary site." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "So, what does that mean for next steps?" "We'll need to complete your scheduled rounds of chemotherapy to address any microscopic cells that might remain in your system. But this is a very positive outcome, Mr. Reeves. The surgery accomplished exactly what we hoped." That evening, alone in my hospital room, I allowed myself to really feel the weight of this milestone. Not a declaration of victory. Cancer was too unpredictable for that, but a significant battle won. The primary tumor that had been growing inside me, threatening my future, was gone, cut out, removed, discarded as medical waste. I thought about all that had been excised from my life in recent months. Not just cancer, but illusions about my marriage, assumptions about security, beliefs about what I could endure. Like the surgeon's careful cuts, life had removed both. Disease and healthy tissue. The healing now would determine what grew back in those spaces. On my 6th day in the hospital, I was deemed stable enough for discharge. Marcus arrived with clean clothes and a carefully prepared apartment. Groceries stocked, prescriptions filled, hospital bed rented for the living room to avoid stairs. "The cavalry has organized," he explained as he drove me home. "There's a schedule. Someone will be checking in every day. Meals are arranged. Raj is handling prescriptions. Sarah's coordinating medical appointments. We've got you covered." I felt a thickness in my throat at the evidence of such thoroughness, such care. "I don't know what to say." "You do the same," Marcus replied, echoing his words from before. "Surgery. That's how this works. The first week at home was harder than I'd anticipated. Hospital pain management had created an artificial sense of progress that home recovery quickly dispelled. Every movement hurt. Sleep came in fitful bursts. The simplest tasks, showering, changing bandages, required Herculean effort. But, true to Marcus's word, I was never alone for long. Friends appeared with regularity, each bringing their own form of support. Raj, a pharmacist, organized my medications in labeled containers with detailed schedules. Sarah, always efficiency personified, created a spreadsheet tracking appointments, symptoms, and milestones. Even my former boss stopped by with an unexpected offer. "The company wants to contract with you on that workflow software you've been developing," he said, sitting carefully on the edge of my couch. "Part-time, remote, your schedule. No pressure, but the offer's there when you're ready." It was exactly the bridge I needed, a way back to professional identity without the immediate demand of full-time work. The timing felt like more than coincidence. It felt like alignment. 10 days after surgery, James called with an update I hadn't been expecting. "Ryan Donahue rejected the plea deal," he said without preamble. "His attorney thinks they can create reasonable doubt about his intent. The DA is pressing forward with full charges." "So there will be a trial?" I said, the implications sinking in. "Yes, though it could be months away. They'll need testimony from victims, including you and Alyssa. Are you up for that?" I thought about it, picturing myself on a witness stand, describing not just the financial aspects, but the human cost. Discovering betrayal while fighting for my life. The added stress during already grueling treatment. "Yes," I decided. "If my testimony helps put him away, I'm up for it." The next day brought another milestone. My first post-surgery follow-up with Dr. Rodriguez. Marcus drove me to the appointment, waiting patiently as the oncologist examined my incision and reviewed my recovery progress. "You're healing well. Physically," she observed. "How are you doing emotionally with everything, between the surgery and the situation with your wife?" "Ex-wife, legally, as of last week," I corrected. "And I'm processing. Good days and bad. The support has been incredible, though. Friends, colleagues, even strangers from the support group. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. Community can be powerful medicine. Now let's talk about resuming chemotherapy. We'll need to wait until your surgical wound is fully healed. Probably another 2 weeks. Then 6 more cycles to ensure we've addressed any microscopic disease. 6 more cycles, 3 more months of poison and nausea and fatigue. But with the primary tumor gone, each session would be preventative rather than palliative. Insurance against recurrence rather than desperate measures against active disease. I can do that, I said with more confidence than I felt. What about work? I've been offered a part-time contract position I can do remotely. As long as you listen to your body and rest when needed, gentle mental engagement can actually be beneficial during recovery. Just be clear with your employers about your limitations. As Marcus drove me home, I found myself thinking about the parallels between cancer recovery and rebuilding after betrayal. Both required acceptance of a new reality. Both demanded patience with healing that couldn't be rushed. Both left scars that would never completely fade, but would eventually stop hurting with every movement. "You're quiet," Marcus observed. "Bad. News at the appointment?" "No, actually. Just thinking about healing. All kinds of healing." That evening, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "From another Donahue victim." I hesitated before opening it, wary of scams or further complications, but curiosity won out. "Mr. Reeves, my name is Eleanor Winters. I'm one of the other victims in the case against Ryan Donahue. The DA's office gave me your contact information with your permission. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I was widowed 2 years ago after my husband's battle with pancreatic cancer. Donahue approached me at a grief support group, posing as a financial advisor who specialized in helping widows. He convinced me to liquidate assets my husband had carefully arranged for my future, promising higher returns that never materialized. I understand from the investigators that your situation was different, that he targeted your wife while you were still fighting your illness. I can't imagine facing both cancer and betrayal simultaneously. A few of us victims are meeting informally next month to prepare for the trial and support each other through the process. If you feel up to it, we would welcome your participation. No pressure, of course. With empathy, Eleanor." I stared at the screen, moved by this connection to someone who understood a piece of my experience. Different circumstances, but the same. Predator. The same exploitation of vulnerability during life's most challenging moments. Without overthinking it, I replied, "Eleanor, thank you for reaching out. I would very much like to join your meeting. While our situations differ, I believe we share important perspectives that could strengthen the case against Donahue. Please send details when available. With mutual respect, Daniel." The next morning brought unexpected news from James. Alyssa's deposition is scheduled for next week before she leaves for Michigan. Her testimony about Donahue's manipulation tactics will be crucial to establishing pattern and intent. The DA asked if you want to be present. Did I? Part of me wanted definitive closure, to hear directly from Alyssa how this had unfolded from her perspective. Another part feared that seeing her would reopen wounds that were just beginning to heal. After consideration, I declined. I'll read the transcript if needed for my own testimony, but I don't need to be there in person. 2 weeks later, I was strong enough to begin short walks around my neighborhood, just to the corner and back at first, then gradually extending the distance. The fresh air and gentle movement lifted my spirits more than I'd anticipated. Each day I noticed different details: a new flower blooming in a neighbor's garden, a family of cardinals nesting in an oak tree, small children racing bikes down the sidewalk. Life continuing, evolving, persisting, as I was. During one of these walks, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Reeves, this is Sandra Wilkins from First Meridian Bank. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I assured her, curious about this follow-up months after the account situation had been resolved. "I mentioned to you previously that your case prompted our institution to develop enhanced protections for customers facing medical crises. Well, that program has now been formalized, and we're calling it the Reeves Protocol." I stopped walking. "I'm sorry, what?" "The Reeves Protocol," she repeated. "It's a set of account monitoring measures and additional verification steps specifically designed to protect clients undergoing serious medical treatment or their families. With your permission, we'd like to use that name officially." I leaned against a nearby tree, overwhelmed by the unexpected legacy. My painful experience transformed into protection for others. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, of course you can use the name. Thank you. Our executive team would like to invite you to speak at the official announcement next month, if your health permits. Your story has already changed our institutional approach. Sharing it more widely could influence the entire banking industry." After hanging up, I stood for several minutes, processing this turn of events, from victim to namesake of a protective measure. From someone who had lost control to someone whose experience might help others maintain it. The following week brought another unexpected development. As I was working on my software project, an email notification appeared from the patent office. The provisional patent I'd filed for my workflow management system months before my diagnosis, and had nearly forgotten about during treatment, had been approved. Victories were accumulating, small and large. Not enough to erase the trauma of the past months, but enough to create balance, to tip the scales back toward hope. At my next support group meeting, I shared these developments: the surgery success, the job offer, the bank protocol, the patent approval. "It's like the universe is finally cutting you a break," Rachel commented with a smile. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'm just finally able to notice the good again alongside the difficult." Michael, our facilitator, nodded approvingly. "That's an important milestone in recovery, when we regain our ability to hold complexity, to see both the pain and the possibilities simultaneously." Later that evening, as I changed my surgical dressing, I studied the incision in the bathroom. Mirror. Still angry red, still tender to the touch but clearly healing. The edges were knitting together, new skin forming where there had been a clean cut. It would leave a scar, a permanent mark of what had happened. But it would no longer be an open wound, a fitting metaphor for everything else I was healing from as well. The next day, I received my copy of the divorce decree in the mail. Final, official, complete. 13 pages of legal language dissolving a decade of shared life. I set it on my desk, neither hiding it nor dwelling on it. Another reality to incorporate into my new understanding of my life. That same afternoon, I joined a video call with Eleanor and 4 other Donahue victims, each with their own story of vulnerability exploited during illness or grief. As they shared their experiences, patterns emerged that would strengthen the prosecution's case. Donahue's careful research of each victim's specific situation, his gradual building of trust, his creation of false urgency, his isolation tactics. "He told me my children were waiting for me to die so they could take my money," said Robert, a 70-year-old widower battling lymphoma. "Said I needed to protect my assets by investing with him instead. He convinced me my late husband's life. Insurance would be claimed by the hospital for unpaid bills unless I converted it to his protected investment vehicle," added Marianne, whose husband had died of heart failure. Each story both unique and familiar, different details, but the same predatory playbook. "What strikes me," I observed toward the end of our meeting, "is how he weaponized our deepest fears during our most vulnerable moments. For those dealing With illness, he exploited fear of becoming a burden. For those grieving, he manipulated fear of dishonoring their loved one's legacy or wishes. Eleanor nodded emphatically. Exactly, and that's what we need to make clear in our testimonies. This wasn't just financial fraud, it was emotional exploitation of people in crisis. As the meeting concluded, we agreed to continue supporting each other through the legal process ahead. What had begun as a practical preparation for testimony was evolving into something more meaningful. A community of survivors helping each other reclaim their narratives. Later that week, I reached a significant recovery milestone. Dr. Rodriguez cleared me to resume chemotherapy. Despite knowing this meant returning to nausea, fatigue, and all the other side effects I'd briefly escaped during surgical recovery, I felt a surprising sense of purpose. Each remaining treatment brought me closer to the finish line. 6 more cycles, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. Then, assuming clear scans, we transitioned to surveillance. Surveillance, regular but less frequent scans and blood tests to monitor for recurrence. Not freedom from cancer's shadow, but a loosening of its immediate grip, a step toward whatever came next. As I settled into the infusion chair for my first post-surgery treatment, I noticed a new nurse I hadn't met before setting up my IV. "I'm Diane," she introduced herself. "You're Daniel Reeves, right? The Reeves protocol guy." I blinked in surprise. "You've heard of that?" She nodded as she checked my port. They just implemented training on it for all medical financial counselors in the hospital system. One of my patients yesterday was telling me about it, said it would have saved her family a lot of heartache during her husband's illness last year. The ripples were spreading already, reaching people I would never meet. My private pain transforming into public protection. It didn't erase what had happened, but it gave it meaning beyond mere suffering. As the chemotherapy began to flow, I opened my laptop and returned to my software project. The code represented something beyond itself now, not just potential income or professional identity, but evidence that creativity could coexist with trauma, that productivity could partner with healing, that purpose could emerge from pain. I glanced around the infusion room at my fellow patients, each fighting their own battles, carrying their own stories. Some had spouses holding their hands, others sat alone like me. All of us bound by this unwanted experience, this club, no. One asked to join. On my phone, I pulled up a blank document and began typing notes for the speech I would give at the first Meridian Bank announcement of the Reeves Protocol. Not a story of victimhood, but one of transformation. Not focused on betrayal, but on the systems now being built to protect others. The poison dripped into my veins, attacking any remaining cancer cells. Outside the hospital windows, spring was giving way to summer, new growth replacing what winter had stripped away. In my hands, words formed that would help others navigate. Terrain I had mapped through painful experience. None of this was the life I had planned, but increasingly it was becoming a life with its own meaning, its own purpose, its own unexpected grace. 6 months after my surgery, I stood at the podium in First Meridian Bank's downtown headquarters, facing an audience of banking executives, financial regulators, journalists, and patient advocacy groups. The Reeves Protocol was officially launching. Today, expanding beyond First Meridian to 5 other major banking institutions that had recognized its value and adopted the framework. When I received my cancer diagnosis, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I worried about many things. Would the treatment work? How would I manage the side effects? Could I afford the out-of-pocket costs? Never once did I worry that the person I trusted most would empty our accounts while I was sitting in an infusion chair. I paused, scanning the attentive faces before me, not seeking sympathy, but connection, the kind that transforms personal tragedy into collective action. What happened to me wasn't just a private betrayal. It was a systemic vulnerability that could happen to anyone facing a health crisis. Cancer patients often can't monitor their finances with the same vigilance they normally would. They're focused on survival. They're trusting others to help manage their lives. They're vulnerable in ways most of us never imagine until we're there ourselves. As I continued my speech, I noticed Sandra Wilkins in the front row, nodding encouragingly. Beside her sat Eleanor Winters and two other Donahue victims who had joined me in advocating for the protocol. Their presence reminded me that this moment wasn't just about my story. It was about everyone who had been financially exploited during their most vulnerable moments. The Reeves protocol isn't about restricting access or creating bureaucratic obstacles, I explained. It's about adding thoughtful layers of protection that recognize the unique vulnerabilities of medical crisis, enhanced verification requirements for large transfers, temporary trusted contact authorization, pattern monitoring specifically calibrated for healthcare-related financial risks. These measures provide guardrails without hindering necessary financial activities. I concluded with the words I'd been refining for weeks. No one should have to choose between fighting disease and protecting their financial security. No one should face financial devastation while they're fighting for their lives. Today, we're taking a significant step toward ensuring they won't have to. This protocol won't prevent every instance of exploitation, but it will make exploitation harder and recovery more possible. And sometimes, that's enough to change the outcome of someone's story. The applause that followed felt like validation, not just of my speech, but of the difficult journey that had led me here. As I stepped away from the podium, several people approached to share their own stories of financial vulnerability during health crises. Each conversation reinforced what I was beginning to understand. My experience, though unique in its details, touched on universal fears about security during our most vulnerable moments. Later that evening, I received a text from Dr. Rodriguez. Saw you on the local news, from patient to advocate in 6 months. Impressive transformation, almost as impressive as your latest scans. Still clear. Those last two words, still clear, carried more weight than the public recognition ever could. 3 months had passed since my final chemotherapy treatment, and my first surveillance scans showed no evidence of disease. Not a guarantee, but a milestone worth celebrating. I texted back, "Thanks for keeping me alive long enough to do something useful with the experience." Her response came quickly. "You did the hard part. I just provided the medical expertise." The next morning, I had a meeting with the software company that had contracted me during my recovery. What had begun as a part-time project to keep me occupied during treatment had evolved into something with real market potential. My workflow management system, designed initially for small businesses, had attracted attention from larger enterprises, seeking more efficient remote work solutions. "We'd like to offer you a formal position," said Alyssa, the project director, Chief Innovation Officer, focusing on developing this platform further. The role would be flexible, partially remote, partially in office once you're fully recovered. It was more than I'd expected. Not just employment, but a leadership role that valued my creative thinking. "I'm interested," I told her, "but I have one condition. I want to develop a specialized version of the software for cancer treatment centers, something that helps patients coordinate care, track appointments, manage medical information, and I want it to be available at minimal cost." Alyssa didn't hesitate. "We can make that work. Actually, there's potential for grants and partnerships in the healthcare space that could support that initiative." As I left the office with a formal offer letter, I was struck by how differently I viewed professional opportunities now. Before cancer, I might have negotiated primarily for salary or stock options. Now, the ability to create something meaningful from my experience mattered. more than maximizing financial gain. The following week brought another milestone, the preliminary hearing in Ryan Donahue's case. Though the trial itself was still months away, this hearing would determine whether there was sufficient evidence to proceed with all charges, including the most serious, predatory exploitation of vulnerable individuals. I arrived at the courthouse early, meeting Eleanor and the other victims in the hallway outside the courtroom. Though we'd connected regularly through video calls, this was our first time gathering in person. There were hugs, nervous laughter, shared apprehension about seeing Donahue face to face for the first time since understanding the full scope of his manipulation. "Remember," Eleanor said as we prepared to enter, "our presence here matters regardless of what happens legally. We're standing together, refusing to be isolated victims. That's already a victory." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate and yet more intimidating. As we settled into the gallery seating, the door from the holding area opened and Ryan Donahue entered in custody. I'd expected to feel anger seeing him, this man who had convinced my wife to abandon me during cancer treatment, who had manipulated her into emptying our accounts, who had deliberately targeted people at their most vulnerable. Instead, I felt something closer to clinical interest. He appeared smaller than the monster I'd constructed in my mind, just a man in an orange jumpsuit, shoulders slumped, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the gallery. The hearing proceeded with methodical precision. The prosecutor presented evidence of Donahue's pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals, documented his consistent tactics across multiple victims, and emphasized the deliberate nature of his approach. Bank records showed the movement of funds. Email and text exchanges revealed his calculated manipulation strategies. Former colleagues testified about his research into potential victims' medical conditions and financial situations. When it was over, the judge ruled that there was more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges. Donahue was led away, still avoiding looking at any of us. Outside the courthouse, a reporter approached our group, asking for comments. Eleanor stepped forward as our designated spokesperson. "Today was an important step toward justice," she said with quiet dignity. "But the true victory will be in changing systems to prevent others from experiencing what we did. Financial institutions, healthcare providers, and legal systems all need to recognize the unique vulnerabilities that serious illness creates. We're committed to advocating for those changes, regardless of the ultimate outcome of this particular case." Her words captured perfectly what our informal coalition had come to stand for, not just pursuing punishment for one predator, but creating protection from all potential predators. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Jen, Alyssa's friend whom I hadn't heard from since Alyssa's move to Michigan. "Daniel, I hope it's okay to reach out. I saw you on the news yesterday speaking about the banking protection protocol. What you're doing is making a real difference. I wanted you to know that Alyssa saw it too. She's in a better place now, working at a dental office, seeing a therapist regularly, rebuilding her life. She mentioned that watching you transform, your experience into something positive, has inspired her to start volunteering at a cancer support center there. I thought you might want to know that some good is coming from her side of this story too. Wishing you continued health and success." Jen, I read the email twice, absorbing this unexpected epilogue. There was a time when any mention of Alyssa would have triggered immediate pain or anger. Now it generated something more complex, a muted recognition that healing was happening on both sides of our broken connection, taking different forms, but moving in parallel directions. I replied simply, "Thank you for sharing this, Jen. I'm glad to hear she's finding her way forward. Please give her my best wishes for healing and growth." As summer transitioned to fall, my physical recovery continued to progress. The surgical scar faded from angry red to silvery pink. My energy levels improved enough to resume moderate exercise. My appetite returned, helping me regain some of the weight chemotherapy had stripped away. I still tired more easily than before. Cancer still needed afternoon rest on many days, but increasingly, I was reclaiming physical capabilities I had feared might be permanently lost. My 3-month surveillance scans came back clear again, another cautious victory in the ongoing vigilance against recurrence. Dr. Rodriguez was encouraged, but maintained her professional restraint. We'll continue monitoring every 3 months. For the first year, she reminded me during my follow-up appointment, if all remains clear, we'll extend to 6-month intervals in year 2. And the long-term outlook? I asked. With your type and stage, successfully treated with surgery and complete chemotherapy protocol, 5-year survival rates are encouraging. But cancer statistics are population data, not individual guarantees. Your job is to live your life fully, while we keep watch. Live fully while keeping watch. A prescription for life after cancer that acknowledged both the hope of recovery and the reality of uncertainty. Not so different perhaps from life before cancer, except now the uncertainty was named, acknowledged, incorporated into my understanding of existence rather than politely ignored. The following weekend, I attended a fundraising walk for colorectal cancer research, joining a team organized by my support group. We wore matching blue t-shirts with "Stronger Than Cancer" printed across the front, a sentiment that felt more earned than aspirational now. As we gathered at the starting line, I noticed how many teams included both patients and their support networks, spouses, children, friends, colleagues. My team looked different, no family members but friends, who had stepped up when family faltered. Marcus with his quiet dependability, Rachel from support group with her fierce optimism. Colleagues who had maintained connection despite my extended absence. New friends from advocacy work who understood the journey without explanation. Not the support system I'd expected when diagnosis landed in my life, but one that had proven its strength and commitment. The announcer called for the survivor's lap to begin. I stepped forward with others wearing the special survivor sashes, feeling the peculiar mix of pride and humility that came with that designation. As we walked, cheered on by supporters, I found myself next to an older man, perhaps in his 70s, whose gait showed the lingering effects of treatment. "First survivor's lap?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Yes. You?" "My 15th. He patted his stomach, where I assumed his own surgical scar lay hidden. "Stage 3 in 2008. They gave me a 40% chance. Guess I landed on the right side of that statistic." "Any wisdom for a newcomer to the Survivor Club?" I asked. He considered this as we rounded the track. "Don't waste energy looking backward at what cancer took from you. Put it toward building what comes next. And celebrate every anniversary, every clear scan, every good day. They're not guaranteed, but they're precious." His words stayed with me throughout the 5-kilometer route, resonating with my evolving philosophy about life after trauma. The path forward wasn't about erasing what had happened or pretending I was unchanged. It was about integrating the experience into a new version of myself, hopefully wiser, definitely more aware of life's fragility and value. The next week brought a development in the Donahue case, an unexpected plea deal. His attorney had approached the DA with a new offer, guilty pleas to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 12 years. James called to discuss the implications. "The DA thinks we should take it. 12 years is still substantial, and it spares victims the stress and uncertainty of trial." "What's driving his change of heart?" I asked. "Last I heard, he was fighting everything. 2 things. First, 3 more victims have come forward with similar stories, strengthening the pattern evidence. Second, and perhaps more significant, his former assistant agreed to testify about his deliberate targeting strategies, how he researched cancer patients and their families, monitored obituaries for recent widows, even tracked hospital parking lots in affluent areas. The calculated predation was even more extensive than we'd realized. What do the other victims think about the plea? Mixed opinions. Some want their day in court. Others just want this chapter closed with certainty. The DA is consulting with everyone before deciding. After careful consideration, I joined those supporting the plea deal. Certainty held value after so much upheaval, and 12 years seemed sufficient for justice without requiring victims to relive their trauma through testimony. 2 weeks later, Ryan Donahue stood in court and pleaded guilty to all charges. I attended along with Eleanor and several other victims, watching as he admitted to deliberately targeting vulnerable individuals during health crises, to manipulating them into financial decisions that benefited him at their expense, to operating without proper licensing while presenting himself as a financial advisor. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Donahue spoke briefly, his voice lacking emotion. "I recognize that my actions caused harm," he said, reading from prepared notes. "I accept responsibility and the consequences. The court deems appropriate. No real remorse, no genuine acknowledgement of the human impact of his predation, but perhaps that was fitting, a reminder that some wounds aren't healed by apologies or closure from their source." The judge sentenced him to 12 years as agreed in the plea deal, adding, "The court also orders full restitution to all identified victims, a lifetime ban from financial services industries, and 5 years of supervised release following incarceration with strict financial monitoring." As Donahue was led away, Eleanor reached for my hand. "It's over," she said quietly. But was it? The legal case had concluded. Yes, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Yet for each of us, the impact of what had happened would continue, to reverberate in ways both visible and invisible, challenging us to decide repeatedly whether to remain defined by victimhood or to craft new identities that incorporated but transcended that experience. Outside the courthouse, our group of victims, now more accurately a coalition of advocates, gathered one last time. We had supported each other through the legal process, but our connection had evolved beyond that shared trauma. We had begun discussing a more formal organization to advocate for protections for medically vulnerable individuals, to provide education about financial exploitation during health crises, to transform our collective experience into systemic change. "This doesn't have to be an ending," I suggested as we prepared to go our separate ways. "It could be a beginning." Eleanor smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already started drafting a mission statement for what comes next." The autumn air carried a chill as I drove home from the courthouse, windows cracked to let the fresh breeze clear my thoughts. One chapter conclusively closed, others opening with possibility. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. Marcus checking in. "It's done," I told him. 12 years, full restitution, lifetime ban from financial services. "Good," he said simply. "Coming to poker tonight to celebrate?" The normalcy of the invitation, not focused on cancer or courts or crises, just friends gathering for irregular game, felt like its own kind of victory. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. That evening, as cards were dealt and chips stacked, conversations flowing about everything and nothing, I found myself fully present in a way that had seemed impossible in the darkest days of treatment and betrayal. Not because those experiences had been erased or forgotten, but because they had been integrated into a life that continued to unfold with purpose and connection. Between hands, I excused myself to take a call from my sister Kate. "How are you? Feeling after the sentencing?" she asked. "Need me to fly down for a visit?" "I'm okay," I assured her. "Better than okay, actually. I'm at poker night with the guys. Life feels normal, but a new normal that includes everything that happened." That's what healing looks like, she observed. Not forgetting, but not being consumed by remembering either. After we hung up, I rejoined the game, grateful for this moment of ordinary pleasure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, continuing recovery, growing advocacy work, developing the healthcare version of my software. Cancer surveillance would remain part of my life for years. The financial and emotional aftermath of betrayal would occasionally resurface in unexpected moments. But tonight demonstrated something crucial. Trauma changes you, but it doesn't have to diminish you. Sometimes it can be the catalyst for growth you might never have otherwise experienced. As the evening wound down, Marcus pulled me aside. There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. A few of us have been talking about starting a support program specifically for people facing health crises alone, whether through divorce, death, estrangement, or just geographic isolation. Your experience got us thinking about how many people go through treatment without the support they need. The idea resonated immediately. Count me in. What are you thinking? Practical. Help primarily. Rides to treatment, meal delivery, home maintenance, paperwork assistance. But also companionship, someone who just shows up consistently. Like you did for me, I noted. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. I just did what friends do. But not everyone has friends who know how to do that, I pointed out. Some people need guidance, structure, permission. This could provide that. We spent the next hour outlining possibilities while the poker game continued around us. Another initiative born from difficulty, another opportunity to transform personal challenge into collective support. When I arrived home that night, I found an unexpected package on my doorstep. Opening it revealed a book, The Year of Magical Thinking, by Joan Didion, her exploration of grief and survival. A note was tucked inside the cover. Different circumstances, similar themes of loss and rebuilding. Thought this might resonate. Alyssa. Reaching out not to rekindle or excuse, but to acknowledge parallel journeys of recovery happening separately. A small gesture of humanization after months of legal proceedings that had necessarily reduced our relationship to evidence and testimony. I placed the book on my nightstand, neither rejecting the gesture nor over-interpreting its significance. Just acknowledging that healing happens in many directions simultaneously, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, that compassion can coexist with boundaries. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run, something that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier, when climbing stairs left me winded. My body was still rebuilding, still housing the memory of surgical intervention and chemical warfare, but increasingly it was becoming reliable again. Not the same as before, but functional in new ways that incorporated what had happened. As I ran, I passed a young couple walking slowly with a woman in a headscarf, clearly undergoing chemotherapy. Without breaking stride, I raised my hand in the subtle acknowledgement that passes between those who recognize each other's journey. They nodded back, a moment of connection without words. Later that day, I finalized the speech I would give at a healthcare financial literacy conference. The following week, another opportunity to share lessons learned and advocate for systemic changes. My calendar was filling with such engagements, each one an opportunity to transform private pain into public purpose. In the evening, I attended my regular support group meeting, now participating as both a continuing patient and a mentor for newer members. Michael had encouraged this evolving role, recognizing that those slightly further along the path could offer valuable perspective to those just beginning. "Remember when you first came here?" he asked as we set up chairs. "You were skeptical about the whole concept of group support." I laughed, acknowledging the truth of his observation. I thought I could handle everything on my own. Cancer and betrayal taught me otherwise. "That's the lesson most of us eventually learn," Michael said. "Not that we're weak for needing others, but that we're human, and humans heal better together than alone." As the group gathered, a new member joined. Us, a man perhaps my age, recently diagnosed, visibly uncomfortable with the setting. I recognized the tightly controlled expression, the reluctant presence, the simultaneous need for and resistance to support. When introductions reached him, he spoke briefly. "I'm Paul, colorectal cancer stage 3, diagnosed 6 weeks ago, starting. Chemo tomorrow. My wife thinks I should be here, so..." He trailed off with a shrug. During the break, I approached him with coffee. "First treatment tomorrow?" He nodded, tension evident in his jaw. "That obvious I'm freaking out?" "Only to someone who's been there," I assured him. "It's scary, but manageable." "Did you..." He hesitated. "How bad was it for you?" "Rough. At times," I admitted, "but I got through it. You will too. And there are people here who understand exactly what you're facing." He studied me with cautious hope. "You seem okay now. Normal." "I am okay," I confirmed. "Different than before, but okay in ways that matter. Maybe even better in some ways. I wouldn't have expected. Better. After cancer." His skepticism was apparent. "Not because of cancer itself," I clarified, "but because of what I discovered while fighting it, about myself, about resilience, about what matters. Cancer isn't a gift. Neither is betrayal or loss, but what you build after devastating experiences that can become something valuable." As the meeting resumed, I watched Paul listen more attentively, his defensive posture gradually relaxing. One more person beginning a journey I was further along, one more connection in the expanding web of mutual support that had become central to my understanding of healing. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The physical changes were evident, the surgical scar, the weight still returning gradually, the hair that had grown back slightly different in texture. But the most significant transformation wasn't visible on the surface. The man looking back at me had been broken open by circumstances beyond his control, had lost what he thought was foundational to his life, had faced mortality and betrayal simultaneously, and had somehow emerged, not diminished but expanded, not unchanged but more authentically himself, not unscarred but healing. I thought of the Japanese art of kintsugi, broken pottery repaired with gold, creating something more beautiful and valuable than the original undamaged piece. The breaks become part of the object's history, highlighted rather than hidden, transforming damage into distinction. Perhaps that was the most profound lesson of the past year. Not that we can avoid being broken, but that how we repair ourselves matters. Not that suffering can be prevented, but that it can be metabolized into something that nourishes rather than depletes us. As I turned out the light, I felt gratitude not for what had happened. Cancer deserves no thanks, betrayal, no appreciation, but for what had emerged from those experiences. Deeper connections, clearer purpose, greater compassion for human vulnerability, including my own. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments of both struggle and joy. But I would meet them as this reconstructed version of myself, scarred but stronger, damaged but determined, broken but beautifully repaired. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.